The dust from the stagecoach had barely settled when Helena Harper announced she would be traveling alone to California, and every person in the Lusk, Wyoming saloon fell silent as death. It was August 1876, and the territories between Wyoming and California were about as welcoming as a den of rattlesnakes. Helena stood there in the dim lamplight, her auburn hair pinned beneath a practical brown hat, her green eyes steady despite the disapproving stares boring into her from every direction. She wore a simple traveling dress of deep blue cotton, far more sensible than the elaborate gowns most women favored, and her hands rested calmly on the worn leather satchel she carried. "Miss Harper, you cannot be serious," said the bartender, a portly man named Samuel who had known her family for years. "A woman traveling alone through Apache territory, through outlaw country, through lands where decent folk do not even venture with armed escorts. It is madness." Helena lifted her chin, that familiar stubborn set to her jaw that her late father would have recognized immediately. "My sister is dying in Sacramento. The telegram said I have perhaps 3 weeks if I am lucky. There is no time to wait for a proper escort, and I certainly cannot afford to hire one. I leave at dawn." The murmurs rose like a swarm of locusts, everyone talking at once, trying to dissuade her. Her sister Margaret had moved west 5 years ago with her husband, seeking opportunity in California. Now Margaret lay sick with consumption, asking for Helena in what might be her final days. No amount of sensible advice would keep Helena from her sister's bedside. "You will die before you make it halfway," said an old rancher sitting near the bar. "That route is cursed with every danger the Lord saw fit to create." "Then I will die trying to reach my sister rather than live knowing I abandoned her," Helena replied, her voice steady but her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned to leave the saloon, needing air, needing space from all their concerned faces and dire predictions. The moment she stepped outside into the cooling evening air, she heard bootsteps behind her. "Hold on there, miss." The voice was deep, measured with a quality that made her stop despite her agitation. She turned to find a man perhaps 26 or 27 years old, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy: worn denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and a hat that had seen better days. A gun belt sat low on his hips, the revolver well-maintained but not showy. "Yes?" Helena asked, prepared for yet another lecture. "Name is Xavier Dalton," he said, removing his hat briefly in a gesture of respect. "I heard what you said in there, about heading to California." "Then you heard wrong if you think I am looking for opinions on the matter," Helena said, more sharply than she intended. She was exhausted from arguing, from defending her choice, from the weight of fear she would not let anyone see. Xavier did not flinch at her tone. "I was not planning to offer an opinion. I was planning to offer my company for the journey. I have business in Sacramento myself, was planning to leave within the week. I can leave tomorrow just as easily." Helena studied him with suspicion. "Why would you do that? What do you want in return?" "Nothing more than the pleasure of knowing I helped someone reach their family and kept a brave woman from becoming another cautionary tale told in saloons," Xavier said, his expression serious. "My mother traveled alone once when she had no choice. She did not make it. If I can prevent that fate for someone else's daughter or sister, then maybe that means something." The honesty in his words, the flash of old pain in his eyes, made Helena hesitate. She had expected offers laden with ulterior motives or condescension, but this felt different. "I cannot pay you," she said carefully, "did not ask you to. I do not even know you." "That is fair." Samuel the bartender knows me, so does Sheriff Morrison, so does pretty much everyone in Lusk. You can ask around. I have worked the cattle ranches around here for 8 years, since I was 18. Never been in trouble with the law, never caused problems. Just a cowboy who knows the route you need to travel and knows you should not travel it alone. Helena wanted to refuse on principle. She had spent her 23 years learning to be independent, learning that depending on others often led to disappointment. Her father had died when she was 19, leaving her and her mother with very little. Her mother had passed just last year, and Helena had been managing on her own ever since, working as a seamstress and taking in laundry to make ends meet. But she was not a fool. She knew the dangers were real. The difference between brave and stupid was often just a matter of acknowledging reality while still pushing forward. "I leave at first light," she finally said. "I have a horse and supplies for myself. Can you be ready?" "I am ready now," Xavier said simply. "I will meet you at the livery at dawn." He put his hat back on, nodded once, and walked away into the darkening evening. Helena stood there watching him go, wondering if she had just made the best or worst decision of her life. That night, she lay awake in her small rented room above the general store, listening to the sounds of Lusk settling into sleep. The town was small, just a collection of wooden buildings along the railroad line, but it was the only home she had known. Leaving felt momentous, even though she intended to return after seeing Margaret. If she returned, she pushed that thought away and focused on packing her saddlebags with the methodical care her father had taught her. Practical clothing, dried food, ammunition for the small revolver she barely knew how to use, a canteen, matches, a bedroll, the small amount of money she had managed to save sewn into the lining of her jacket. When dawn broke across the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Helena was already at the livery stable. Her horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Penny, nickered softly as Helena checked the saddle straps for the 3rd time. "You are early." She turned to find Xavier leading his own horse, a tall roan gelding with intelligent eyes. He had 2 saddlebags packed efficiently, a rifle in his saddle scabbard and a bedroll tied behind his saddle. He looked prepared for hard travel. "I do not believe in being late," Helena said. "That makes 2 of us." He swung into his saddle with easy grace. "We should make good time today if the weather holds. I am thinking we can reach Fort Steele by nightfall if we push steady." Helena mounted her own horse, grateful for the practical split skirt she wore that allowed her to ride astride rather than side saddle. Society might frown on it, but society was not making this journey. They rode out of Lusk as the town was waking, past the handful of people already moving about their morning routines. A few folks waved, more just stared. Helena kept her eyes forward, focused on the horizon where the sun was climbing higher, focused on the journey ahead. For the first hour, they rode in silence. The land around them was open prairie, rolling grassland dotted with sage and the occasional stand of cottonwoods marking a creek bed. The morning air was cool but promised heat later. Overhead, hawks circled in lazy patterns. Xavier rode beside her, not ahead as she might have expected. He did not try to take the lead or assert control over their direction. He simply kept pace, his eyes constantly scanning the landscape with the alertness of someone who knew danger could come from any direction. "Have you made this journey before?" Helena finally asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Twice," Xavier said. "Once when I was 20, working a cattle drive that went through Nevada. Once 2 years ago when I needed to deliver a herd to a buyer in Sacramento. It is not an easy road, but it is passable if you are smart about it." "What makes someone smart about it?" "Respecting the land. respecting the people whose territory you are crossing, not taking stupid risks, knowing when to push forward and when to wait. Having enough supplies but not so much you are weighed down, he glanced at her. Being able to shoot does not hurt either. I can shoot, Helena said, perhaps a bit too defensively. Xavier raised an eyebrow. Can you now? I can hit a target, she amended. Whether I could hit a target that was shooting back is a different question. He surprised her by laughing, a warm sound that seemed to lighten the vast landscape around them. That is more honest than most would be. We will hope it does not come to that, but if it does, you aim for the center of the body and you keep shooting until the threat stops. Do not hesitate. Hesitation will get you killed. The blunt words should have frightened her, but instead Helena found them oddly reassuring. Xavier was not sugarcoating the dangers or treating her like fragile china. He was treating her like an equal who needed practical information. Tell me about your sister, Xavier said after another stretch of silence. What is she like? Helena felt a smile tug at her lips despite the circumstances. Margaret is 3 years older than me and has always been the adventurous one. When father was alive, she used to sneak out and ride his horses even though ladies were not supposed to ride the way she wanted to ride. She was the one who taught me to shoot, actually. Said women needed to know how to protect themselves. Sounds like a wise woman. She is, or was. I do not know how much the sickness has changed her. Helena swallowed hard. The telegram from her husband was brief. Just said she was asking for me, that the doctor said it was only a matter of weeks. I have not seen her in 5 years. 5 years because I could not afford the travel, could not leave mother, could not find the time. Now time has run out. You are going now, Xavier said gently. That is what matters. They rode on through the morning, stopping briefly at midday to water the horses and eat some dried beef and hard biscuits. Xavier proved to be a man of few wasted words, but when he spoke, he said things worth hearing. He pointed out landmarks, explained which plants were safe to use for medicine or food, and shared small stories about the land they crossed. As the afternoon wore on, the terrain began to change. The flat prairie gave way to more rolling hills, with rocky outcroppings appearing like bones pushing through the earth's skin. The sun beat down relentlessly, and Helena was grateful for her hat, and the canteen Xavier had insisted they fill at every creek. Fort Steele is just ahead, Xavier said as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. We can rest there for the night. It is not fancy, but it is safe. The fort appeared as a collection of wooden buildings surrounded by a log palisade. It was not a large installation, but it represented civilization and relative safety in the vast wilderness. As they rode through the gates, soldiers went about their evening duties, and Helena felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Xavier handled the arrangements, speaking with the post commander and securing them separate spaces in the visitors' quarters. He did it all without asking her, but somehow without making her feel dismissed either. When he brought her to the small but clean room she would use, he paused at the door. There is a mess hall where we can get hot food, he said. You must be tired, but you should eat before you rest. Helena realized she was exhausted. The tension of leaving, the long day in the saddle, the constant awareness of vulnerability on the open trail had all taken their toll. But her stomach was also empty and insistent. Give me a few minutes to wash the dust off, she said. Dinner in the mess hall was simple military fare, but after a day of dried meat and hard biscuits, it tasted like a feast. Helena sat across from Xavier at a long wooden table, watching soldiers and travelers eat and talk around them. How long until we reach California? She asked. If we make good time and have no problems, 2 weeks, Xavier said. Maybe less if we are lucky, more if we run into trouble. What kind of trouble are you most worried about? He considered the question, chewing thoughtfully. This time of year, probably water more than anything. Some of the creeks will be running low. We will need to plan our route around reliable water sources. After that, outlaws. There are gangs that work the routes between here and California. They watch for travelers who look like easy targets. Do we look like easy targets? Xavier met her eyes. Honestly, a single woman and one cowboy. Yes, we do. But I am hoping my reputation for being too much trouble to bother with will precede me in some places. And I am hoping we can avoid the worst of the known bad areas. Your reputation? Helena asked, curious. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. I might have been in a situation or two where I had to demonstrate I was not an easy mark. Word travels among certain crowds. Helena wanted to ask more, but something in Xavier's expression suggested he was not ready to share those stories. That was fair. They barely knew each other. Trust would have to be built mile by mile, day by day. That night, lying on the narrow cot in her quarters, Helena thought about Margaret. She tried to remember her sister's laugh, the way she looked when she was excited about something, the feel of her hand squeezing Helena's when they were girls facing some childhood fear together. The thought that she might arrive too late, that Margaret might die before Helena could say goodbye, sat in her chest like a stone. But at least she was trying. At least she was on the road, making the journey, refusing to let fear or convention stop her. And she was not alone, despite all her planning to be. Xavier Dalton had appeared like something out of a prayer she had not known she was praying, and for that, she found herself unexpectedly grateful. The next morning they set out before dawn, wanting to cover as much distance as possible before the heat of the day. The land they crossed was wilder now, less settled, more prone to sudden ravines and rocky passages. Xavier led them along paths that were barely visible, following some instinct or knowledge that Helena did not possess. Around mid-morning, Xavier suddenly held up a hand, signaling her to stop. Helena reined in penny, her heart jumping into her throat. Xavier was staring at something in the distance, his body tense. "What is it?" Helena whispered. "Riders," Xavier said quietly. "4 of them, coming from the north." Helena strained her eyes and finally spotted them, dark shapes against the pale landscape. "Who are they? Cannot tell from here." "Could be ranchers, could be drifters, could be trouble." Xavier's hand moved to rest casually on his thigh, close to his revolver. "We are going to keep riding, nice and steady. If they approach, you let me do the talking." "Understood," Helena nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. They continued forward, maintaining their pace. The riders changed direction, angling to intercept them. As they got closer, Helena could make out more details. 4 men, rough-looking, with the kind of worn gear that spoke of hard living. None of them looked friendly. The lead rider raised a hand in greeting as they came within speaking distance. "Morning," he called out, but there was no warmth in it. "Morning," Xavier replied, his voice neutral and calm. The 4 men fanned out slightly, a subtle movement that put them in a loose semicircle. Helena's pulse hammered in her ears. The lead man, a heavy-set fellow with a thick beard and small, calculating eyes, looked her over in a way that made her skin crawl. "That is a pretty companion you have there, friend," the man said to Xavier. "We are just passing through," Xavier said, ignoring the comment. "No trouble wanted or offered." "Nobody said anything about trouble," the bearded man replied, but his smile was ugly. "Just making conversation. Long, lonely trail out here. Man might wonder what a woman is doing in such rough country." "Traveling to family," Helena said before she could stop herself. Xavier shot her a quick glance that said without words he had wanted her to stay quiet. "Family," the bearded man repeated. He looked at his companions and they all chuckled like they had shared a private joke. That is real sweet. Long way to go for family, though. Dangerous. Might be you could use some additional protection. We could ride along with you, for a price. We are managing just fine, Xavier said. His voice had not changed, still calm and level, but Helena sensed something coiled and ready beneath the surface. And we will be on our way now. He nudged his horse forward. Helena did the same. For a moment she thought the men might let them pass. Then the bearded man urged his horse sideways, blocking their path. Now, that is unfriendly, he said. We are just trying to be neighborly. Move aside, Xavier said, and now there was steel in his voice. The bearded man's expression hardened. His hand moved toward his gun. In a blur of motion that Helena almost could not follow, Xavier drew his revolver. The sound of the hammer cocking was loud in the sudden silence. I will say this once more, Xavier said, his gun steady and pointed directly at the bearded man's chest. Move aside. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Helena could hear her own breathing, could feel every muscle in her body tense to bolt or fight, or she did not know what. The three other men had their hands near their weapons, but none of them had drawn. They were looking at their leader, waiting for his call. The bearded man stared at Xavier, some calculation happening behind his eyes. Whatever he saw in Xavier's face, whatever he read in the steady gun and steelier gaze, made him decide the risk was not worth it. Easy, friend, he said, raising his hand slightly. No need for that, we are going. He backed his horse up and his companions did the same. But you watch yourself out here, lot of dangerous folks on this trail. I will keep that in mind, Xavier said. The four men rode off, heading east. Xavier kept his gun drawn, kept watching them until they were distant specks on the horizon. Only then did he holster the weapon. Helena realized she had been holding her breath and let it out in a shaky exhale. Are you all right? Xavier asked, turning to look at her. I think so, Helena said, though her hands were trembling. Thank you. That is what I am here for. He studied her face. You did well. Staying calm, not panicking, that matters more than you might think. I was terrified. Being terrified and staying calm are not mutually exclusive. Xavier looked back in the direction the men had gone. We should put some distance between us and them, just in case they decide to come back with more friends. They rode hard for the next few hours, Xavier pushing them at a pace that had both horses breathing heavily. When he finally slowed, they were in rougher country, with rocky hills providing cover and concealment. He led them into a narrow canyon where a small stream trickled over stones. We will rest here, he said, dismounting. Let the horses recover. Helena slid off Penny, her legs shaky from the combination of fear and hard riding. She led her mare to the stream and let her drink while Xavier did the same with his gelding. Does that happen often? Helena asked. Men like that, often enough, Xavier said. Some folks see the empty spaces of the West as places where rules do not apply. They figure might makes right, and anyone weaker is fair game. How did you know they would back down? Xavier was quiet for a moment, watching the water flow over the rocks. I did not know for certain. But I was willing to shoot, and he saw that. He was looking for easy prey, not a fight where he might die. Men like that usually back down when they realize the cost might be too high. What if he had not backed down? Then I would have shot him. Xavier said it matter-of-factly, without bravado or hesitation, and probably would have had to shoot one or two of his friends before the rest decided to run. I have been in that situation before. I did not want it to come to that today, especially with you here, but I would have done what was necessary. Helena looked at this quiet cowboy who had appointed himself her guardian, and she realized she knew almost nothing about him. What had his life been like that he could speak so calmly about killing men? What situations had he survived that left him with a reputation among outlaws? "Xavier," she said carefully. "Who are you really?" He looked up from the stream, meeting her eyes. "I am exactly who I said I am. A cowboy from Lusk, Wyoming, but I grew up rough. My father was a drunk who liked to use his fists. My mother was a saint who tried to hold everything together until she could not anymore. When she died, I was 16. I left home and hired on with a cattle outfit. Over the years, I have worked a lot of ranches, made a lot of drives, and ended up in more than a few tight situations." "Did you kill someone?" The question came out before Helena could stop it. "Yes," Xavier said simply. "Twice. Once when a man pulled a gun on me over a card game where he accused me of cheating even though I was not. Once when outlaws hit a camp I was working and killed 2 of my friends. Both times it was them or me, and I chose me. I do not regret it, but I do not take pride in it either. It is just what happened." Helena absorbed this. She should have been frightened, should have been reconsidering this journey with this man, but instead she felt a strange sense of relief. Xavier was not some hero from a dime novel. He was real, complicated, and honest about his past. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "You deserve to know who you are traveling with," Xavier replied. "If you want to turn back, head home, I would understand. I can point you toward Fort Steele and you could get an escort back to Lusk." "No," Helena said immediately. "I am not turning back. Margaret needs me, and I trust you." Something shifted in Xavier's expression, a warmth that had not been there before. "That means more than you might know." They rested for an hour, letting the horses graze on the sparse grass near the stream. Xavier shared some of the jerky from his supplies, and Helena contributed some dried apples she had packed. They ate in companionable silence, listening to the wind whisper through the canyon. When they set out again, Helena rode with a new awareness. She watched the landscape the way Xavier did, looking for signs of trouble or shelter or resources. She paid attention to how he chose their path, how he read the land like a book written in stone and sage and shadow. That night, they made camp in a sheltered spot among rocks, building a small fire for warmth and coffee. Xavier showed her how to position her bedroll to minimize the chill from the ground, how to keep her gun close but safe. "Tell me about your business in Sacramento," Helena said as they sat by the fire, tin cups of bitter coffee warming their hands. "You said you had business there." Xavier stared into the flames. "I am meeting with a man about buying some land, a small ranch actually. The owner is retiring, moving back east to live with his daughter. I have been saving for years, and I finally have enough for a down payment. If the land is as good as he claims, I can run cattle, maybe some horses, build something that is mine." "That sounds wonderful," Helena said, and she meant it. "A place of your own." "That is the dream," Xavier said. "I am tired of drifting, tired of working other people's land and making other people's fortunes. I want something to build on, something to pass down someday." He paused, looking almost embarrassed. "If I am lucky enough to have a family to pass it to." "You want a family, someday, if I meet the right woman." He looked up from the fire, meeting her eyes across the flames. "Someone strong, someone who does not break when life gets hard. Someone who would travel across half the West to be there for her sister, even though everyone told her it was impossible." Helena's heart did something complicated in her chest. The way Xavier was looking at her, the quiet intensity in his words, made something shift between them. This was no longer just a cowboy helping a stranger. Something deeper was taking root, fragile and tentative but real. "I am nothing special," Helena said softly. "That is where you are wrong," Xavier replied. "You are one of the bravest people I have ever met. You just do not see it yet." They sat in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence. Helena felt hyper-aware of Xavier's presence, of the way the firelight played across his features, of the steady calm he radiated. She had spent so long being independent, being alone, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone see her, really see her, and value what they saw. The days began to blend together in a rhythm of riding and resting, of small challenges and quiet conversations. They crossed into Utah territory, the landscape becoming more dramatic with red rock formations and distant mountains. Xavier led them through places that took Helena's breath away. Canyons painted in shades of crimson and gold, vast stretches of sage under endless sky. They encountered other travelers occasionally. Most were friendly or at least neutral. A few times Xavier steered them away from groups he did not like the look of, his instincts keeping them safe. Once they came across a broken-down wagon, a family stranded with a cracked wheel. Xavier spent half a day helping the father repair it, refusing any payment but accepting the mother's offer of fresh bread for their journey. Helena watched him work, saw the easy competence in his hands, the patience he showed with the family's frightened children. This man who could draw a gun faster than she could blink was gentle with a crying toddler, making her laugh by pulling a penny from behind her ear like magic. "You are good with children," Helena said later as they rode on. Xavier smiled slightly. "I like children. They are honest. They have not learned to be anything but themselves yet. Do you want children of your own? If I am blessed with them, yes. A whole houseful if my future wife is willing." He glanced at her. "What about you? Do you want children?" Helena had not let herself think much about that possibility. Children required a husband, and she had not had much luck in that department. The few men who had courted her in Lusk had been intimidated by her independence or had wanted to mold her into something more conventional. She had never been willing to shrink herself to fit someone else's expectations. "I think I would," she said slowly. "With the right partner, someone who would not expect me to stop being myself just because I became a mother." "That is how it should be," Xavier said. "My mother never stopped being herself, even when my father tried to beat it out of her. She had this spark, this joy in life that he could not destroy no matter what he did. When I think about a wife, a partner, I want someone with that kind of strength." They were 10 days into the journey when they reached a small settlement called Pine Valley. It was barely a town, just a trading post, a blacksmith, and a few scattered homesteads. But it had a well, and the trading post owner's wife offered them a hot meal and a place to sleep in her barn. Over dinner, the woman, a weathered but kind soul named Mrs. Patterson, asked about their journey. When she learned they were heading to Sacramento, she shook her head. "You have picked a dangerous time," she said. "There has been a gang working the trails west of here. They hit a small wagon train 2 weeks ago, killed 3 men, and made off with everything of value. The territorial marshal is supposedly tracking them, but so far no luck." Xavier's expression grew serious. "How many in the gang?" Reports vary. "Somewhere between 6 and 10 men. They are led by a fellow named Crane, a real piece of work by all accounts, mean as a snake and twice as smart." After dinner, Xavier and Helena stood outside the barn, looking at the stars scattered across the black velvet sky. The air was cool and sweet with the smell of pine. "We should consider taking a longer route," Xavier said. "If this gang is as active as Mrs. Patterson says, the direct path is too risky." "That will add days," Helena protested. "I might not have days." "You definitely do not have any days if you are dead," Xavier said bluntly. "Helena, I know you are in a hurry, but we have to be smart about this." She wanted to argue, wanted to demand they push forward on the fastest route regardless of danger. But she could see the genuine concern in Xavier's face, and she knew he was right. "How much longer would a different route take?" she asked. "Maybe 3 extra days." but it would take us through mountains that are harder for a large gang to operate in, and past a fort where we could get supplies and information. Helena closed her eyes, doing the painful math in her head. Every day felt like it might be the day Margaret took her last breath. But getting herself killed would not help her sister either. "All right," she said. "We go the safer route." Xavier touched her arm, a brief gesture of support. "We will get there, I promise you that." "You cannot promise that, neither of us can." "Then I promise I will do everything in my power to get you there safely and as quickly as possible. That I can stand behind." They left Pine Valley before dawn the next morning, Mrs. Patterson pressing a package of food into Helena's hands and whispering a prayer for their safety. The new route took them into rougher country, climbing into foothills thick with pine and aspen. The air grew cooler, the terrain more challenging, but it was also beautiful in a way that made Helena's chest ache. They rode through meadows of wildflowers, crossed crystal streams where elk came to drink, and camped beneath trees so tall they seemed to hold up the sky. In different circumstances, with less urgency driving her, Helena might have wanted to linger in these places forever. Xavier was an easy companion, she discovered. He did not talk just to fill silence, but when he did speak, he said interesting things. He told her about different ranches he had worked, about cattle drives and roundups, about horses he had known and friends he had made. He asked her about her life in Lusk, about her work as a seamstress, about her dreams beyond the day-to-day struggle to survive. "I always wanted to open my own dress shop," Helena admitted one evening as they made camp near a small lake. "Not just doing repairs and alterations, but designing original pieces. I used to sketch dresses in the margins of newspapers, imagining what I would create if I had the resources." "Why did you not pursue it?" "Money, mostly. It takes capital to open a shop, to buy good fabric and supplies, to rent a space. After Father died, Mother and I barely scraped by. After she passed, I was alone with nothing but debts to pay off. Dreams felt like a luxury I could not afford." Xavier was building their fire, carefully arranging the kindling. "Dreams are never a luxury. They are what keep us moving forward. Without them, we are just existing, not living." "That is poetic for a cowboy," Helena said with a slight smile. "Cowboys can be poetic. We have a lot of time alone with our thoughts under big skies. Makes a man philosophical." He got the fire going and sat back. "You should open that shop. After this is all over, after you have seen your sister, you should go back to Lusk, or maybe stay in California and open your dress shop." "With what money?" "With money you save, money you borrow, money you earn. Where there is a will, there is a way." He looked at her across the young flames. "You are brave enough to cross dangerous territory alone. You are certainly brave enough to start a business." Something about his confidence in her made Helena's throat tight with emotion. He barely knew her, and yet he seemed to see potential in her that she had stopped seeing in herself. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For believing in me. For not treating me like I am foolish or weak. For being here." Xavier held her gaze. "Helena, you are the least foolish or weak person I have met in a long time. It is my privilege to be here, to be part of this journey with you." The moment stretched between them, charged with something electric and new. Helena felt her heart racing, felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fire. She thought Xavier might say something more, might cross the space between them, but he turned back to tend the fire instead. That night, lying in her bedroll and staring at the stars visible through the pine branches, Helena acknowledged what she had been trying to ignore. She was falling for Xavier Dalton. This quiet, capable cowboy with his steady eyes and gentle strength had worked his way past her defenses without even trying. It was foolish. They had known each other barely 2 weeks. They were from the same small town but had lived in different worlds. When this journey ended, they would go their separate ways and she would probably never see him again. Except he was buying land in Sacramento. He would be in California, building his ranch, creating his future. And she would be either returning to Lusk alone or staying in California with whatever remained of her sister's family. She told herself not to hope, not to imagine possibilities that might never exist. But the heart rarely listens to such sensible advice. The next day they reached the fort Xavier had mentioned, a military outpost called Fort Cameron. The commander, a weathered captain named Miller, confirmed that the Crane gang was still active but had moved north, away from their intended path. "You should be all right if you are careful," Captain Miller said. "But I would not dawdle. The gang is unpredictable and they might circle back this way." They resupplied at the fort, bought some better ammunition, and set out the next morning refreshed and ready. The land beyond the fort was a mix of high desert and mountain passes, challenging but manageable. Xavier navigated it all with the confidence of someone who had crossed such terrain many times. They were 17 days into the journey, camped in a rocky canyon with good water and shelter, when Xavier finally asked the question Helena had been half expecting. "What will you do if your sister has already passed when we arrive?" Helena had thought about this, had dreaded it in the dark hours of sleepless nights. "I suppose I will help her husband with arrangements, stay for the funeral, and then decide what comes next. He has children, Margaret wrote me about them. 2 boys. They will need support." "Would you stay in California?" "I do not know. It would depend on many things." She looked at Xavier across their campfire. "What about your land? What if the deal falls through? Then I will find another piece of land, or I will go back to Wyoming and keep saving until I can try again." "One setback does not mean the dream is dead." "You are relentlessly optimistic," Helena observed. Xavier laughed. "Hardly. I am practical. Optimism is thinking everything will work out. Being practical is knowing that things might not work out but being willing to adapt and try again." "Big difference. Is there room for pessimism in your worldview?" "Only if it motivates you to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. Otherwise it is just dead weight." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle and pop. Then Xavier spoke again, his voice softer. "Helena, I need to tell you something." Her heart jumped. "What?" "These past weeks, traveling with you, getting to know you, it has meant more to me than I think you realize." He stared into the fire as if the flames held the words he needed. "I did not expect to feel this way. When I offered to ride with you, it was about doing the right thing, about protecting someone who needed protection. But somewhere along the way, it became about more than that." Helena's breath caught in her throat. "Xavier." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have already fallen. I do not know the exact moment it happened, but I know it is true. You do not have to say anything back, and I will not let this change the journey. I will still get you to Sacramento safely. But I could not go another day without telling you the truth." For a moment Helena could not speak. She felt like she was standing on a cliff edge, about to either fall or fly. Every sensible part of her said this was too fast, too uncertain, too risky. But her heart, her foolish, hopeful heart, knew exactly what it wanted. "I am falling in love with you too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was just gratitude or proximity or the intensity of the journey, but it is more than that." "You are more than that." Xavier stood and crossed to her side of the fire. He knelt beside where she sat and took her hands in his. His hands were warm, calloused from hard work, strong and gentle at once. "When this journey is over," he said, When we reach Sacramento and you have seen your sister and I have looked at my land, I want to court you properly. I want to build a life with you if you will have me. I know it is soon to be talking about such things, but life is short and uncertain. I learned that young. When you find something real, something worth holding on to, you do not let it slip away. Helena felt tears prick her eyes. I want that too. I want all of that. Xavier reached up and cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. Then we have something to build toward, something to fight for. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but Helena did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the promise of something good and real in a world that had given her so much loss. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet and perfect. It was a first kiss and a promise and a beginning all at once. Helena felt like she had been holding her breath for years and was finally able to breathe again. When they pulled apart, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I will protect you with everything I have, he said quietly. Not because you are weak or need protection, but because you matter to me more than anything else. And I will stand beside you, Helena replied, as an equal partner, not as someone you have to carry. That is all I could ever want. They sat together by the fire, Helena leaning against Xavier's shoulder, his arm around her waist. The future was still uncertain, still full of unknowns and dangers, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, Helena felt hope. The remaining days of the journey took on a different quality. There was a lightness between them now, an openness that had not existed before. They still rode hard, still stayed alert to dangers, but they also talked about the future with growing excitement. Xavier told her about his plans for the ranch, describing the kind of house he wanted to build, the improvements he would make to the land. Helena found herself drawn into his vision, adding her own ideas, imagining herself as part of that future. We could have a garden, she said as they rode through a mountain pass. Vegetables, herbs, maybe some flowers. I always wanted a real garden, not just a window box. We could, Xavier agreed. And you could have a workroom for your dress designs, part of the house with good light for sewing. You would not mind having a wife who worked. Why would I mind? Your work is part of who you are. I would never ask you to give that up. They crossed into California on a bright afternoon in late September. The landscape changed again, becoming golden hills dotted with oak trees. The air smelled different, somehow, rich and warm with promise. We are close now, Xavier said. Sacramento is maybe 3 days ahead if we push. Helena felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her chest. They were almost there. Soon she would know if she had arrived in time, if Margaret was still alive, if this desperate journey had been worth all the risk and hardship. As if sensing her fear, Xavier reached over and took her hand briefly, squeezing it. Whatever we find, we will face it together. Together, Helena repeated, holding on to that word like a lifeline. They made good time over the next 2 days, stopping only when necessary. The traffic on the road increased as they neared Sacramento, more wagons and riders heading to and from the growing city. They passed farms and ranches, signs of civilization reclaiming the wild land. On the afternoon of the 23rd day since leaving Lusk, they crested a hill and saw Sacramento spread out in the valley below. It was larger than Helena had imagined, a real city with buildings and streets and the bustle of commerce. We are here, Xavier said quietly. Helena's hands trembled on the reins. I am terrified. I know, but you are also brave. Come on, let's go find your sister. Margaret's house was on the outskirts of the city, a modest 2-story structure with a small yard. Helena had the address from the telegram, and a shopkeeper gave them directions. As they rode up the street, Helena's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. A man was working in the yard, repairing a section of fence. He looked up as they approached, his face weathered and tired. When he saw Helena, his expression shifted to something like relief mixed with sadness. "You must be Helena," he said, setting down his hammer. "Margaret said you would come." "I am Thomas, her husband." Helena dismounted, her legs unsteady. "Is she still alive?" Thomas nodded. "Yes, barely. The doctor said she has a few days at most, but she has been fighting, waiting for you. She knew you would come." Relief and grief crashed over Helena in equal measure. She had made it in time. Barely, but she had made it. "Can I see her?" "Of course. She is upstairs." Thomas looked at Xavier. "You are welcome as well. Margaret will want to thank the man who got her sister here safely." They left their horses tied in the yard and followed Thomas into the house. It was neat and clean despite the air of crisis that hung over everything. Two young boys, perhaps 5 and 7 years old, peeked at them from the kitchen with solemn, frightened eyes. Thomas led them upstairs to a small bedroom. The curtains were drawn, the room dim and quiet. In the bed lay a woman so thin and pale she looked like a ghost, but when her eyes opened and saw Helena, they sparked with life. "You came," Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible. "I knew you would." Helena rushed to her sister's side, taking her frail hand carefully. "Of course I came. Wild horses could not have kept me away." Margaret's lips curved in a weak smile. "Wild horses and outlaws and mountains and every danger in between. Thomas told me he sent the telegram 3 weeks ago. I did not think it was possible." "I had help," Helena said, looking back at Xavier. "This is Xavier Dalton. He rode with me the entire way, kept me safe." Margaret's eyes shifted to Xavier, and something knowing flickered in them. "Did he now? Come here, Xavier Dalton, so I can see the man who brought my sister through the wilderness." Xavier approached the bed, removing his hat respectfully. "Madam, I am glad we arrived in time." Margaret studied him with surprising intensity for someone so ill. "You love her," she said. It was not a question. Xavier glanced at Helena, then back at Margaret. "Yes, madam, I do." "Good. She deserves someone who will love her as fiercely as she loves others." Margaret squeezed Helena's hand. "He is a good man, I can see it. Do not let him get away." "I was not planning to," Helena said, tears streaming down her face. For the next 3 days, Helena barely left Margaret's side. They talked for hours when Margaret had the strength, reminiscing about their childhood, their parents, the life they had shared before distance separated them. Margaret told stories about her boys, about the life she had built in California, about her regrets and joys. Xavier stayed close but gave the sisters space. He helped Thomas with work around the house, played with the boys, and made himself useful. In the evenings, when Margaret slept, he would sit with Helena and let her cry or talk or just be silent. On the 4th day after their arrival, as dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Margaret took her last breath with Helena holding her hand. It was peaceful as death could be. Helena felt her sister slip away and knew with absolute certainty that the difficult journey had been worth it. They buried Margaret in a small cemetery on the edge of Sacramento, under an oak tree that reminded Helena of the trees they had climbed as children. Thomas was stoic and shattered all at once. His boys cried, not fully understanding but knowing their mother was gone. After the funeral, Helena and Xavier stayed for 2 weeks to help Thomas and the boys begin adjusting to their new reality. Helena cooked and cleaned and helped the boys with their grief. Xavier made repairs around the house and helped Thomas with some financial matters that had been neglected during Margaret's illness. One evening, as Helena sat in Margaret's sewing room sorting through her sister's things, Thomas knocked on the door frame. "Can I speak with you?" he asked. "Of course." Thomas sat in the chair across from her, looking older than his 32 years. "I wanted to thank you for coming. It meant everything to Margaret. She died at peace because you were here." "I would not have missed it for anything," Helena said. "I know. Xavier told me about your journey, about the dangers you faced. That is the kind of love Margaret always said you had, fierce and unstoppable." Thomas paused. "I also wanted to talk to you about the future. The boys and I, we are going to move back east to live near my family. I cannot manage here alone, and they need family around them." "That sounds wise," Helena said. "The thing is, Margaret's share of this house was hers from money her husband left her. In her will, she left everything to you. The house, what little money there was, her belongings. She said you deserved a fresh start, a place to build a life." Helena stared at him in shock. "I cannot take that. You and the boys need it. We have my family to go to, and I have a job waiting for me back in Boston." Margaret was clear about this. She wanted you to have the opportunity she had, to build something in a place where no one knew your history or your struggles. She wanted you to have California. Helena felt tears welling again. Even in death, Margaret was trying to take care of her. "Besides," Thomas continued, "I think she had a feeling about you and that cowboy. She always could read people. And I think she wanted you to have a home to start your marriage in, if that is where things are heading." "It is," Helena said softly. "It is where things are heading." A week later, Xavier's land deal went through. The ranch was about 20 miles north of Sacramento, a beautiful piece of property with a small house, a barn, and good grazing land. Xavier returned from his first inspection with plans and dreams spilling out of him. "The house needs work, but the bones are solid," he told Helena as they sat on Margaret's porch watching the sun set. "There is a creek that runs through the property, oak trees, good grass. It is everything I hoped for and more." "It sounds perfect," Helena said. Xavier turned to face her fully. "Helena, I know we talked about courting properly, about taking time, but given everything that has happened, I have to ask, will you marry me? Will you take this ranch and this life I am building and make it ours instead of just mine?" Helena did not need time to think. "Yes, absolutely yes." Xavier pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "When?" he asked. "Soon. As soon as we can arrange it. I do not want to wait." They were married 3 weeks later in a small church in Sacramento, with Thomas and the boys in attendance before they left for Boston. It was a simple ceremony, but it felt sacred and right. Helena wore a dress she had sewn herself, pale blue with cream lace, and Xavier wore his best clothes, hair carefully combed and face nervous and joyful at once. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. And to him, she was. They moved to the ranch, to the land Xavier had bought, to the life they would build together. Helena claimed Margaret's house as a rental property, securing them additional income. She set up her workroom in the ranch house just as Xavier had promised, with good light and space for her to design. The first year was hard work, building up the ranch, getting cattle, making improvements. But it was also filled with joy. Helena had never been happier than when she was working beside Xavier, creating something together. They talked and laughed and loved each other through every challenge. 2 years after their marriage, Helena gave birth to a son they named Andrew, with bright blue eyes and his father's quiet disposition. Watching Xavier hold their baby for the first time, seeing the wonder and fierce love on his face, Helena felt a completeness she had not known was possible. More children followed. A daughter named Marie 2 years after Andrew, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady gaze. Then twin boys, Jack and Samuel, who turned their peaceful ranch into beautiful chaos. The ranch prospered. Xavier's skill with horses and cattle became known throughout the region, and they built a reputation for quality stock and fair dealing. Helena's dress designs began to attract attention, and she opened a small shop in Sacramento that did well enough to need an assistant. They had challenges, of course. There were hard years when drought threatened their cattle. There were moments of fear when children got sick or accidents happened. But they faced everything together, just as they had faced that first dangerous journey. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they sat on the porch of their much-expanded house, watching their children play in the yard. The ranch sprawled around them, prosperous and beautiful, everything they had worked for made real. "You ever think about that journey?" Helena asked, leaning against Xavier's shoulder. "Those 23 days between Lusk and Sacramento." "Every day," Xavier said. "Best decision I ever made offering to ride with you." "Best decision I ever made accepting," Helena replied. Xavier turned and kissed her temple. "Do you think your sister knew? When she asked you to come, do you think she knew we would end up here?" Helena thought about Margaret, about her sister's knowing eyes and her final words. "I think she hoped. I think she knew I needed a push to take a chance on something bigger than the small life I had carved out in Lusk, and I think she would be happy to see what came of it." "I wish she could have known the children," Xavier said. "They would have loved her. They know her through stories. And I see her in them sometimes, especially Marie. That stubborn independence, that fire. That is pure Margaret." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Helena reflected on the improbable path that had led her to this moment. If Margaret had not gotten sick, if she had not been brave or foolish enough to attempt the journey alone, if Xavier had not been in that saloon, had not heard her words, had not offered to ride beside her the entire dangerous journey. So many small choices, each one building on the last, creating a life she could not have imagined when she left Lusk all those years ago. Andrew called from the yard, asking his father to come see something he had built. Xavier squeezed Helena's hand and went to admire their son's creation, leaving Helena alone with the sunset and her thoughts. She thought about all the women she had known who were told their dreams were impractical, that they should settle for less, that safety and convention mattered more than passion or purpose. She thought about how close she had come to living a small, quiet life of quiet desperation. And she was grateful beyond words that she had chosen differently. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and celebrations. Andrew grew tall and serious, taking to ranching like he was born for it. Marie showed an early talent for drawing and design, working beside her mother in the dress shop when she was old enough. The twins were wild and joyful, keeping everyone on their toes. Xavier's hair started showing silver at the temples. Helena found laugh lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror. They aged together, their love deepening with each passing year, each shared challenge, each moment of joy or sorrow experienced side by side. They added to the ranch, buying adjacent land when it became available. They built a larger barn, added more cattle, started breeding horses. The ranch became known as one of the finest in the region, but more than that, it became a home filled with laughter and love. On Sundays, they would often make the trip to Sacramento to visit Margaret's grave. Helena would bring flowers and tell her sister about the children, about the ranch, about the life she had built. She liked to think Margaret could hear her, that she knew how the story had ended. "Thank you," Helena would whisper to the gravestone. "Thank you for being stubborn enough to ask me to come. Thank you for seeing what I needed even when I could not see it myself." When Andrew turned 18, Xavier officially made him a partner in the ranch. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, a passing of responsibility and trust. Watching her husband and son work together, Helena felt a profound sense of achievement. They had built something lasting, something that would continue beyond their own lives. Marie opened her own dress shop in San Francisco at 21, making a name for herself with designs that blended practical Western wear with elegant Eastern fashion. She would return home often, bringing stories of the city and new ideas for her mother to try. The twins each found their own paths. Jack became a horse trainer of considerable skill, while Samuel surprised everyone by developing a talent for numbers and becoming a banker in Sacramento. As Helena and Xavier entered their 50s, they began to slow down just slightly. Not stopping, never stopping, but allowing themselves to enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. They took trips to San Francisco to visit Marie. They spent long evenings on the porch, talking and dreaming like they had when they first fell in love. "If you could go back," Xavier asked one evening, "back to that saloon in Lusk when I offered to ride with you, would you change anything?" Helena considered the question seriously. "I would have packed lighter," she said, making Xavier laugh. "But no, I would not change the important things. Every mile of that journey led us here. Every danger, every fear, every moment of hope. I would walk that path again in a heartbeat if I knew it ended with you. Even the parts where you thought we might die, especially those parts. They made me realize how much I wanted to live, wanted to experience everything life had to offer. I had been so focused on just surviving for so long that I forgot about living. That journey taught me the difference." Xavier took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "You taught me plenty too. About courage, about love, about what matters most. I was drifting before I met you, working toward a dream but not really understanding why. You gave me purpose beyond just owning land. You gave me something worth building for." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind of silence only possible between two people who had shared a lifetime together. The ranch buzzed with evening sounds. Somewhere in the barn, Andrew was finishing up the day's work. In the distance, they could hear horses nickering and the low sounds of cattle settling for the night. "Tell me the story again," came a small voice from the doorway. They turned to find Andrew's daughter, their first grandchild, a bright-eyed 6-year-old named Margaret after the sister who had started it all. "What story, sweetheart?" Helena asked, though she knew. "The story about how you and Grandpa met. About the long ride and the bad men and how you fell in love." Helena smiled and beckoned the girl over. Little Margaret climbed into her lap, fitting perfectly in the space between Helena's arms. Xavier moved his chair closer so he could be part of the telling. "Well," Helena began, "it started when I got a telegram that said my sister was very sick and needed me. Everyone in town said I should not go, that it was too dangerous for a woman to travel alone. But you went anyway," Margaret said, having heard the story before but never tiring of it. "I went anyway, because sometimes you have to be brave even when you are scared, and that is when your grandpa stepped up and said he would ride with me." "Was he handsome?" the girl asked. Xavier laughed. "I will let your grandmother answer that." "He was the handsomest man I had ever seen," Helena said, making Xavier's ears turn red even after all these years. "But more than that, he was kind and strong and steady. And over 23 days of riding across dangerous country, I fell in love with him. And then you got married and had my daddy and lived happily ever after," Margaret finished triumphantly. "Something like that," Xavier agreed. Though the happily ever after part took a lot of work, it was not magic. It was choosing each other every single day, even when things got hard. "But you did choose each other every day," the girl said confidently. "We did," Helena confirmed. "We still do." Andrew came up from the barn then, calling for his daughter that it was time for bed. Little Margaret hugged both her grandparents and ran off, full of energy even at the end of a long day. "She loves that story," Andrew said, shaking his head with amusement. "I must have heard it 100 times growing up, and now she wants to hear it just as often." "It is a good story," Xavier said simply. "True stories usually are." After Andrew and his family had gone to their own house on the property, Helena and Xavier remained on the porch. The stars were coming out, brilliant against the darkening sky. Helena thought about all the nights she had slept under these same stars during that journey so many years ago, never imagining where that path would lead. "I love you," she said to Xavier. Words she had spoken thousands of times, but that never lost their meaning. "I love you too," he replied, pulling her close. "Thank you for letting me ride beside you all these years. Thank you for never trying to ride ahead of me or behind me, but always right beside me as an equal." They went inside together as full darkness fell, ready for sleep and whatever tomorrow would bring. The ranch would be there in the morning, the work would continue, and they would face it all together as they always had. Years later, when Xavier passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, Helena grieved deeply but not despairingly. They had been married for 47 years, had built a life beyond what either had dared to dream in that saloon in Lusk. 4 children, 10 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren carried on their legacy. At Xavier's funeral, held at the ranch under the oak trees he had loved, Helena stood straight and dry-eyed, honoring his memory with the same strength he had always valued in her. She told the assembled family and friends about the journey that had brought them together, about the quiet cowboy who had offered to ride beside a stubborn woman against all advice. "He was my partner in every sense of the word," Helena said. "Not my savior or my protector or my keeper, but my equal partner in building this life. He saw me, truly saw me, and loved what he saw. That was his greatest gift to me." She lived another 12 years after Xavier's passing, remaining active in the ranch and her business, surrounded by family, continuing to tell the story of that dangerous journey and the love it had sparked. When she finally joined Xavier, it was with the peaceful knowledge that they had lived fully and loved deeply. They buried her beside Xavier under those oak trees, and on the shared headstone, the children had inscribed, "She rode alone until he rode beside her, and together they rode into forever." The ranch continued through the generations, each one hearing the story of Helena and Xavier, of courage and love and the choice to take a dangerous journey that changed everything. Little Margaret grew up to run the ranch after Andrew, and she made sure the story was never forgotten, that it was passed down like a precious heirloom. Because it was not just a love story, though it certainly was that. It was a story about choosing bravery over safety, about finding partnership in unexpected places, about building something lasting from the foundation of mutual respect and deep love. It was about 2 people who could have lived separate, smaller lives, but instead chose to travel together and create something extraordinary. And on clear nights, when the stars came out over the California ranch, family members would sometimes sit on that same porch and imagine they could see them. Helena and Xavier, forever young, forever riding side by side across an endless western sky, together as they had always been meant to be.